From misguided studio meddling to bizarre gymnastics to bad butlering, these are the stories of excellent sci-fi movies undone by a single scene. Set in an eternally dark and raining Los Angeles, 1982's Blade Runner comes to its conclusion with replicant hunter Rick Deckard and female replicant Rachel leaving the urban hellscape to fly away to a beautiful, pristine countryside. But it begs the question, if that place was there this whole time, why don't more people move there? The answer, of course, is that director Ridley Scott didn't want that ending. Furthermore, the studio added B-roll footage from The Shining to make one of the multiple endings of Blade Runner feel more upbeat. Blade Runner disappointed at the box office at the time of its release, but over the years, fans have come to appreciate Scott's world-building and the movie's groundbreaking aesthetic. When an accidental screening of an earlier print received positive feedback, Warner Brothers tried again. This time, it was the way Scott wanted it, minus the happy ending and Harrison Ford's divisive voiceover. The original theatrical cut still exists for those who do prefer the original, even though it may be misguided. 1998's Dark City throws Rufus Sewell's Murdoch into a murder mystery where he can't remember anything except vague flashes of a place called Shell Beach. The noir aesthetic and creepy pacing, directed by Alex Proyas, really make the whole thing feel like a waking nightmare of gothic sensibility on a wide canvas. On the run from the police and weird, inhuman-looking strangers as reality itself is reshaped, Murdoch notices that everyone else falls asleep at midnight. Eventually, Murdoch realizes he too has that power, but how and why? In the 90s, New Line Cinema tended to notoriously over-explain its high-concept movies, so they decided to spoil the big mystery of Dark City up front, with an opening narration by Kiefer Sutherland, who plays Dr. Schriever. In this narration, the audience comes to know the strangers as aliens whose world is dying. The aliens are experimenting on humans with the help and collaboration of Sutherland's Dr. Schriever. This information puts us way ahead of Murdoch and puts the movie in the awkward position of playing catch-up. Once Schriever eventually shows up on screen, he explains it all over again. Proyas did eventually get to release a Blu-ray without the narration. Fans who own the original have another solution at their disposal. They can just change the audio to another language for the opening, then switch it back.
My God, you really can do it.
2017's The Last Jedi evokes extremely passionate reactions from Star Wars fans for being so different from the other films in the saga. Writer-director Rian Johnson's movies are known for calling attention to and critiquing story structure. Bringing that sensibility to Star Wars thrilled some viewers and completely turned off others. Either way, Johnson directed Mark Hamill to an unforgettable performance as Luke Skywalker, conveying a life of regret and cynicism that evolved the Jedi Master, while drastically departing from previous chapters. Plus, Kylo Ren was revealed to be even more of a tragic villain. And on top of all that, who doesn't love porgs? The problem with The Last Jedi boils down to its straight-out-of-Disney casting of child slaves, who look like they walked straight out of Newsies. Perhaps if they stayed in that one scene in Canto Bight, it'd be fine. But then at the end of the movie, we see the kids playing with the homemade toys of Luke Skywalker and a broom-holding boy staring up at the stars. The implication is that a young Rian Johnson was inspired to become a filmmaker himself after playing with Star Wars figures, which is just a little too on the nose. 1997's The Lost World: Jurassic Park might be one of Steven Spielberg's most underrated films. It's essentially a tribute to all the old monster flicks that Spielberg clearly loves, from the 1925 The Lost World to the vampire flick Nosferatu, and even King Kong. Well, minus the monster being slaughtered at the end. Spielberg even names the boat in the film The Venture, in case the storyline of a huckster bringing a primeval monster to a city with disastrous results wasn't clear enough. But there's a reason that The Lost World is consistently underrated, and it's because of one glaringly awful scene. Spielberg the dad sometimes gets in the way of Spielberg the master filmmaker. There's no moment more emblematic of this than when Ian Malcolm's daughter Kelly uses gymnastics to defeat velociraptors. These are predators that the first Jurassic Park established as the ultimate alphas, capable of outsmarting master trackers and attacking a T-Rex without fear. If only we'd known that all it took was a young girl swinging on bars to kick them into submission.
The school cut you from the team?
2009's Terminator Salvation has a great hook that doesn't even involve the series' central Connor family, at least not at first. A man played by Sam Worthington named Marcus is sentenced to death. Instead, he wakes up in a post-apocalyptic future, eventually realizing he's been transformed into a cyborg. On his journey of self-discovery, he encounters various pieces of Terminator technology. It's our first full-on glimpse of the future war, and in many ways it delivers what fans of the franchise have been asking for. Sadly, Salvation suffers from bad ending syndrome. When John Connor, played by Christian Bale, suffers a heart injury, Marcus donates his. which is notably the one part of him that's still human. Nobody does a blood type match, and the surgery is pulled off successfully in a battlefield that hasn't been sterilized, which seems highly unlikely. The metaphor of the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz is seriously overplayed.
No heart. All hollow.
Director McG eventually revealed that the Salvation alternate ending would have seen John killed and his skin put on Marcus's Terminator endoskeleton, an idea that would be recycled for 2015's Terminator Genesis. But when that version leaked and garnered negative responses, a more upbeat one replaced it, which McG knew would anger plenty of viewers. He wasn't wrong. 1989's Batman, directed by Tim Burton, was a massive hit at the time, and it arguably kicked off the modern obsession with comic book movies. With quirky A-list casting that paid off, a comic book city designed from the ground up, and a fusion of noir and German expressionism, it absolutely blew audiences away. And now that we've seen a variety of other cinematic Batman interpretations, this version doesn't need to be everything to everyone. The only misstep of this Batman that remains egregious is Alfred's massive indiscretion in bringing Vicky Vale into the Batcave. It's not like this is a Batman who needs to retire, as Michael Keaton's version of Bruce Wayne has only just begun fighting crime. Alfred would seem to be on board with the whole Batcave and all the trimmings, though he also seems to want Bruce to settle down with the first desirable woman who comes along. It's bad enough that he blows Bruce's cover story right off the bat, and then he just brings a photojournalist into the most secret place in Gotham. Even the sequel, Batman Returns, addressed this by having Bruce chastise Alfred for it long after the fact.
Security? Who let Vicky Vale into the Batcave?
Despite that acknowledgement, it's still a bizarre choice to have his trusty butler do this at a time when his discretion matters the most. Alien Resurrection should have been a slam dunk. It was directed by French filmmaker Jean-Pierre Jeunet, featured a cast that included series regular Sigourney Weaver and newcomers like Winona Ryder and Ron Perlman, and it had a screenplay from Joss Whedon. Set on a space station where horrific experiments bring Ripley back to life as a clone and mutate the xenomorphs, it initially plays out as a perfect fusion of both horror and action in a franchise that often lets one overpower the other. But this is another case of a movie that generates disproportionate ill will because of a weak ending. Thanks to gene splicing, the xenomorph queen develops a more mammalian womb and gives birth to a new creature that looks like a melting plastic surgery nightmare. Once again, it gets on the escape ship, and once again, it gets sucked out a window, this time through a small hole because it has no endoskeleton to protect it. Right before it dies, it even seems to talk. It's as if everyone wanted to jump the gun to a movie set on future Earth where the creatures do evolve. Movies that save the stuff you really want to see until the sequel are taking a huge risk, and Resurrection pays for that hubris. Avatar is a great movie, and certainly one of the most successful ever at the box office. But we have a nit to pick with the extended cuts. Overall, both the 11-minute longer and the 30-minute longer versions add context and illumination. We see what the overcrowded Earth looks like, and the origins of the human-Na'vi conflict become more even-handed, as we learn about the natives initiating some of the hostilities. But here's the part we'd like to cut: Sutei's extended death. In the theatrical version, it's straightforward enough. While attacking an RDA gunship, Neytiri's former betrothed gets shot and falls to his death. But in both extended versions, he's still barely alive after he hits the ground. He lives just long enough to personally forgive Jake for effectively stealing his fiancée and his birthright, and he declares him the new chief. None of this feels necessary. It just makes Jake even more of an annoyingly noble savior figure.
I will not kill you. It is the way. And it is good.
You might laugh at the idea that only one scene ruined Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. After all, the whole thing has a reputation for being notoriously ridiculous, from Kirk, Spock, and McCoy singing "Row, row, row your boat" to Kirk having a debate with God. But when it comes to Star Trek, ridiculous is part of the package. Remember that time in the original series when they met the Easter Bunny? Or the mirror Spock and his evil goatee? The original cast approached such things with the same intensity as harder sci-fi, and those episodes were far from unwatchable. Simply put, the campy elements fit just fine. So within those parameters, how can The Final Frontier possibly fail? As it turns out, the scene that lets us down features a blatant violation of stakes. We're told that nobody has been to the Eden planet Shakari because it's beyond the Great Barrier. That sounds threatening. So when the Enterprise finally makes it to this energy field, they sure seem to be in quite a bit of trouble. But somehow they just make it through, where so many others have previously tried and failed. Nothing adverse happens whatsoever. Nobody explains how this is even possible. In a movie full of silliness, everything else gets explained, but not this.
Is it possible? Fascinating. Are are we dreaming?
This may sound like a stretch, but bear with us. The scene that ruins the 2014 remake of RoboCop is the first one in which we learn the protagonist's name is Alex Murphy. Up until this point, the movie could have been a sequel. It's arguably a better RoboCop film than either of the two sequels to the original. It also feels further along in the timeline. Ed 209s are in the Middle East, and Omnicorp's robotic ambitions are far from secret. Furthermore, 2014's RoboCop features more overt body horror elements, plus a nifty twist that Murphy's real hand is preserved, so there'll always be a human finger on the police gun's trigger. It also boasts an excellent cast that includes Michael Keaton, Gary Oldman, and Samuel L. Jackson. All of these elements should make for an excellent follow-up, but what sinks the whole endeavor is the fact that it's a remake. The original was a pitch-black satire as well as a twisted Jesus allegory that made for one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. Its magic has never been recaptured in any subsequent franchise effort, so starting over might make sense on paper, but it will always be doomed to fail by comparison. If it had instead been presented as RoboCop: The Next Generation, audiences might have been a bit more receptive.